Complacency is death. If you are not consistently trying to be better and grow and learn more and surround yourself with people that are better and more successful than you, that know more than you, you're eventually going to die. It's just that's just the nature of the beast. Because the world is always evolving in every aspect, you have to apply that to every part of the business, and that includes the legal part.
What's up, everybody? Today on the Big Picture Blueprint, we're having a business owner who is not within real estate on the show. And this is going to begin a series of ours. Don't know how long it'll go for. Partially, that might be based on feedback we get, but of business owners outside of real estate where we really try and dissect how their business works, all aspects of it from sales, operations, legal, HR, etc., to pull concepts out that are applicable to our businesses as well. Something a little bit different, and we'd love feedback from you all. But before we get into the specifics of today's guest, Mason, what's up? How's it going?
Man, things are good. I think we picked the first great guest to have on the show. I met him playing golf at Pinehurst with a bunch of guys in M19, which is a golf mastermind that I'm involved with. And having a conversation with him, I recognized that there are just business leaders out there that we have to get on the show to talk with, because what they're doing, just like you said, Dan, super applicable to what we do every day. And it's just fun, interesting conversations with interesting people, which is what the goal of this podcast is. So today we had the pleasure of interviewing Brett Sachs with MVP Accident Attorneys in California. Brett graduated from Michigan State University College of Law and has since built a massive personal injury attorney office in California with multiple offices, and he is continuing to grow. You're going to hear all sorts of stuff about employee retention and incentives, hiring correctly, cash flow management, marketing and client acquisition, and utilizing AI to make your business much more efficient. So please enjoy. Brett Sachs, welcome to the Big Picture Blueprint. How are you doing, man?
Thank you, Mason. I'm doing very well. I'm very honored to be invited onto your podcast and can't wait to share a little bit about our life and our business.
You hear that, Mom? Someone's honored to listen to the podcast or to be on the podcast. And if anyone besides my mom's listening, you're welcome. This is going to be a ton of fun. We're starting a new series, and I couldn't think of anyone better to get it started with than Brett. Him and I met on a golf trip for a mastermind that we're both involved in, and just getting to hear about his industry and what he's built has been exciting. But before I just start blabbering, Brett, tell us about who you are, where you came from, and where you're at today.
Of course. Listen, if this gets long-winded, stop me. And sometimes I'm a lawyer, so I like to hear myself talk a lot. And I believe that it's important for anyone listening to my story to understand where I come from a background, because it definitely affects how I view my life and the business today. So I'm from Indiana originally, born and raised just north of Indianapolis in a city called Carmel. Went to Indiana University. My dad was a business owner. He owned a lot of Weight Watchers franchises across the country. And there was a time in our life where a drug called FinFin came out, which they almost overnight destroyed the weight loss industry, kind of like what Ozempic and GLP-1s are doing now. And at that time, weight loss companies like Jenny Craig and Weight Watchers and all these other things, they didn't have the wherewithal to know how to compete with that. And so basically there was a time where my dad thought we were going to go bankrupt. They couldn't make payroll, they couldn't do a lot of things, and they got scared. So what my dad ended up doing was he completely took away all of his dividends, his family's dividends, his salary, and put it back all into the business to make sure that his employees were paid and the business kept running, even as lean as it was. And then what he ended up doing was getting a second job working for the Indianapolis airport, delivering lost luggage in the middle of the night. And the reason why that's important is because he used to take me along with him. And I thought we were just going on adventures and having a good time. But what I realized is that that's, in my opinion, what a true leader of a family and a business should do. They should put others first, and then the rest will come. And so that work ethic was installed within me at a very young age without me even knowing it, which is kind of how I got to where I am today. So fast forward, law school. Met my wife in undergrad at IU, went to law school with my wife at Michigan State. She's from California, so we moved out here. I never dreamt of being a personal injury lawyer, to be honest with you. That wasn't like a goal of mine. I actually wanted to be a family law lawyer because I'm a product of a family of divorced and didn't really want any kids to have to go through what I went through. Joined a family law firm in California and realized that that dream is non-existent. With the way that California laws work, you're not really making a whole lot of change, and it's all form-based stuff, and judges want everyone to mediate. There's no decisions, and so it's just kind of like you're not helping anybody. So that I basically just put my feelers out, put my resumes out to everything, and landed a job at a very large personal injury firm, and realized that I can make the same effect on people's lives that I wanted to with families, but with consumers in California, and I can make a significant change in a very short period of time, respectively, of their lifespan. And what was interesting, Mason and Dan, is I didn't get hired as like a lawyer at that firm. The only position they had was an intake lawyer. So a lawyer that basically took all the calls, did the intake, evaluated cases, gave me access to look at marketing numbers, where cases were coming in, how we were, you know, marketing to the public, what was working, what wasn't working, and gave me access to thousands and thousands of files. And what that taught me is something that's so invaluable. It basically taught me how to get cases, and case acquisition in our industry is an extremely important skill set. So when I got tired of doing that, I thought I wanted to be a real lawyer. So my wife was a corporate lawyer. She did everything you see on TV. She went to court. She argued in front of judges and juries and motions and depositions and all like the stuff that you think is really cool, being in law school. And I was like, I want to do that. I didn't go to law school to answer phones all day. Like, this is boring. So I tried that, and within a month realized that I hated that life. I couldn't stand billable hours. I couldn't stand motion writing. It wasn't as fun as it looked on the outside. And I realized that my true skill set was in the operations of the business of law rather than the practice of law, which was amazing because that allowed me to really hyper focus on starting the firm. And that was a decision my wife and I made together, where I basically got two jobs, saved up for a year, and put all that money into the firm. And in my opinion, when you're starting any business, my biggest goal is to know what you want the business to look like before you start, so that every decision you make can be geared towards reaching that goal. And that goal can change, but if you're just out there, throwing stuff at a kitchen sink and seeing what sticks, your scalable rate is going to be significantly smaller, and shorter than, or longer, sorry, it would be longer than what you want it to be. And so me knowing exactly what I wanted to do in the firm and what I wanted my firm to look like helped me scale at a significant rate. And basically my goal when I started MVP, was to change the perception of what we call billboard lawyers. So the ones that you see on, the radio and TV and the billboards, the high advertising firms that get a bad rap, as a firm that doesn't necessarily care about every client. Not that that's maybe true or not true, but that's the perception they have. My goal was to change that perception, create a high volume firm that can access cases at a high rate, that can close cases at a fast rate, and to do all of that without sacrificing the client outcome. That was our main goal. So that was a little long winded, but here we are. That's my story.
No, and we have a lot that we're going to unpack and, kind of throughout the episode there. But I feel like, personally, I resonate a lot with going into an industry thinking you're going to make change and be able to save a lot of people with my previous life in healthcare. And then you kind of realize the bureaucracy and your hands are tied behind your back and you're not able to make it. And you jumping in, getting essentially like grunt work operations role to teach you the ins and outs of the actual business of law. I mean, it probably wasn't a ton of fun then, but you actually got to do the work, which makes it so whereas you're building this organization, you recognize the constraints and possibilities of positions like that, which is exciting. But let's talk at a very high level. What is a personal injury lawyer? Like, what do you do?
That's a great question. So basically, I'm a consumer lawyer. What that means is that the average person out there is considered a consumer, somebody who is a citizen, lives their life. They have certain rights. most of the time consumers don't know what those rights are. And when they get involved in any type of incident that creates injury or results in injury, not resulting from their own fault. So if somebody got into a car crash that they weren't at fault for, let's say, a grocery store left water on the floor too long, and I can go into the details of what that looks like, and they slip and fall and break their hip. There are a lot of times where people are getting injured, not at the fault of their own, and they have rights to receive certain type of compensation, to pay for their medical bills, to pay for their pain and suffering, because businesses and other consumers out there, they have a duty to protect others around them in certain circumstances. So when you're in a car, you have a duty to drive safely and make sure that you're watching out for other people, pedestrians, other cars, stuff like that. And so what we end up doing is we end up helping those individuals because the access to legal representation is extremely costly generally. And because we work on what's called a contingency fee basis, where we don't make any money, they don't pay us out of pocket. We get a percentage of their settlement or the verdict at the end of the case. It allows them to have access to high level legal representation and fight these large corporations. Because what people don't understand is if you're involved in a car accident, we're not going after the person that hit you generally. They most likely made a mistake. They're not driving drunk. They're not doing something that was grossly negligent. They weren't paying attention, or something happened and they made a mistake. It can happen to any of us. But they have insurance to protect them. And a lot of people don't realize that insurance companies are a horrible conglomerate of an organization and business operations, and they make billions of dollars a year. And they do that by high premiums and not paying out on settlements that they have to make. And their job as the insurance company is to protect the person that was at fault. And they don't do that very often. They care way more about the bottom line. They spend billions of dollars a year making sure that they come up with new strategies, new technology to deny, delay, and to defend reasonable claims out there. And so what's interesting, Mason and Dan, is that the average person who gets involved in, let's say, a fender bender, they don't immediately think I need to hire a lawyer, right? And then when they think of people who do, they're like, oh, these greedy litigants, they just want to, make money off of something that's so simple. Well, every person is developed differently. Every body is different. You don't know their previous history. You don't know what they're dealing with. There is significant scientific empirical data to support that anything that's within 2 to 5 miles or faster can actually result in significant injury. And people don't realize that the what the body goes through when you're involved in an impact, even as slow as that, even if you don't see any property damage on the car, can cause significant injury. Just like you can have a car that flips and turns and gets destroyed and the person walks out without a scratch. It just depends on the individual. So what's nice is that we're able to help out a lot of people that would never be able to get helped out in the first place, and they actually have a real voice to fight these conglomerate insurance companies that have unlimited budgets to hire the most powerful lawyers in the country.
Sure. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, but before I forget, I really want to hone in on your definition of personal injury attorneys. It's very, very broad, right? I mean, there's
Right.
the physical damages that can occur from accidents and slips and falls, and then there's the pain and suffering from different sorts of wrongdoings. Do you hone in on, okay, I handle accidents and I go after insurance companies, or what's your specialty? Because that's a massive umbrella.
Yeah, that's a big, huge umbrella, and personal injury is even bigger than that. So generally, if in my opinion, if you're a good law firm, you either have a big enough resource pool to have major departments to handle individual specific types of personal injury cases, which can involve something from a car accident, a slip and fall, products liability case. So, a product that blows up in your hand, public entity cases, anything that goes after a government entity like a city or a state, um, you know, s- anything like pedestrian accidents, trucking accidents is very specific as well. So in my opinion, unless you have the resources to really, really build departments within the firm, which is very, very costly to handle those specialties, you should stay in a very specific niche. And so that's what we do. So our firm specifically handles the majority of car accidents and slip and falls. anything that has high level, complex aspects, very high end public entity cases, product liability cases, very large brain injury cases, we will work on in house. But it's important to the consumer to know that we will definitely bring in experts, other lawyers in California that really hone in and specialize on these individual like type of injuries or type of accidents or incidents to help associate in on the case. Number one, brand recognition and indexing from the defense is very important. So they have information on all the lawyers that a consumer can hire. They know what type of cases they take. They know whether they settle, under value. They know if they take things to trial. That information is important. So you want to make sure you have the right attorney for the right specific case. And what's nice about California is that we're designed to make sure that we can fee split with other lawyers. That doesn't affect the consumer. It doesn't affect my client. So if my client comes in, signs my contingency fee at, whatever it is, 35%, then I would have to share that 35% with another lawyer. It will not, it actually gives the consumer, the client, best of both worlds. You get two for one. So you get, my firm specializes in the car accidents and slip and falls, but hyper focuses on client satisfaction. So we're there to handhold the clients, answer the phone calls, inform them of what's going on, talk to them every 2 weeks or sooner. Where like the high end litigation trial firms, they're not good at that. They're like a really good brain surgeon that has horrible bedside manner. They're very, very good at the legal part, but they don't have time or don't know how to communicate to a consumer at a low level and understand how to explain what's going on. So you get the best of both worlds with a firm like mine, but we specialize very much so on car accidents and slip and fall accidents.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. Now, you've already answered one of the questions I had, which was about accounts receivable, how you get paid. I know most of these, I hear the advertisements, we only get paid if you win. And so when I think about starting a business like that, that's there's several things I'm thinking, but first and foremost, are you just starting with hey, I've got a big cash pile where I can just burn this for 6, 8, 12 months while I get the first case to completion? And then as a tangent to that, client selection has got to be one of the biggest, I think, points of skill in this business, because if you take on the wrong clients and waste 9 months of your life and have nothing to show for it. So how do you get started in a business like this? And then how do you discern who are the people to take on as clients?
So that's a great question. And again, so I'll answer that in twofold. I'll answer the part about how you get started and think about that, and then client selection and case acquisition. So again, my previous experience at my other firm jump started that. And then because of how analytical I am and the data that I track initially through that firm, I was able to get a really good understanding of how to do both. And so basically, when I started the firm, my goal was I have to have an entire year of overhead saved up. So whatever it was that I saved up over the year of planning for the firm, I gave myself, I basically divided that by 12 and said, this is my monthly budget for the first year. And the reason I knew it was a year is because working for the type of firm that I worked for, I knew how long the average case took to settle.
Mm.
So the type of cases I knew I was going to take on had between, a 9 and 12 month shelf life. So if you can get through that case within 9 to 12 months, you're going to start getting paid. So I said to myself, give myself that cushion, make sure I stay within a budget initially to give myself a full year. And obviously it's an average. So there are cases that are going to resolve before that. There are cases that are going to resolve after that. So I knew that time frame should be significant enough to give me the comfort to get through the first year, which is probably the hardest. And, obviously we were able to live off my wife's salary and, we scaled down. Sold my car, got a really old used car and, lived off of ramen noodles for the first year and really honed in on being a good entrepreneur and business owner. So that's how I started the firm. That's, in my opinion, if anyone's going to take on a personal injury type of law firm, and they want to specialize in the average everyday accident versus like the high complex litigation, which takes years and years and years, give yourself a full year. I think that will be a very safe estimate. And then you can kind of update that throughout the year based on, what you're doing. The second aspect, Dan and Mason, is that because I was the intake attorney, I was able to evaluate thousands and thousands of cases over my years with that firm. And more importantly, I was able to track those cases to resolution. And one of the reasons which made me want to kind of leave that firm was that when I was tracking these cases, we had, as the intake department, had a certain criteria, like what we were looking for as far as what we could take from the initial conversation. And so I was tracking all those cases, and I found a huge common denominator of certain cases that quote unquote fit the criteria initially, but never basically ever resolved for what they wanted to, which is like the minimum, like monetary resolution to those cases. And so I went to my boss and I said, listen, here's all the things that we're learning in the initial intake call that, in my opinion, have the common denominator of all these cases that didn't resolve for the minimum value that you wanted to resolve the case for. So either stop taking these cases because we're not getting enough residual income, like referrals from these type of clients to make up for that, or figure out how to monetize these cases. And so, where my boss basically looked at me and was like, "That's not really your job. So go back to your office and finish the phones." I was like, "All right, well, I see my future here is probably pretty limited. They don't actually appreciate intuitive thinking and analytical thinking, and which is something that I've installed in my firm to make sure that doesn't happen." Um, I was able to really analyze those cases. So I actually was able to take on the cases that didn't resolve for those numbers and figure out how to monetize them for those numbers. And so because of that, and I didn't really have any like huge advertising budget at that time. I mean, I think my budget at the time was like $2,000 or $3,000 a month, like, and that had to pay for everything. Like, so, you know, I couldn't advertise. And basically, what I did is I went to every single law firm I could think of and just said, I will take any single case you don't want. Any case that goes to your intake department that you turn down, give me a first look at, and I'll give you a big fee split on it. And so that really drove our growth really quickly, and we were able to take a lot of cases that a lot of firms ended up rejecting, which is nice because those are the consumers that need the help the most, right? Those are the ones that either have low property damage, so it doesn't look like they're not injured, and the insurance companies are deny those type of cases unless they have good representation, and cases that have like liability disputes that I knew I could get around, and be able to articulate and prove otherwise, which helped us grow, and it helped these consumers get access to lawyers, and that also helped a really good referral source, from previous clients, startup, because if you're rejected by 4 firms and then the firm that takes you resolves your case successfully, of course you're going to want to refer to that firm. So within a few years, we went from having an average of 1 or 2 cases a month to 80 to 100 cases a month, and we just skyrocketed our growth. And so that really helped me understand what type of cases to take and how long I should, have my runway from the very beginning of the start of the firm.
Yeah, a lot of good points there. I think the single biggest for our audience is that you worked for a company doing what you wanted to do. So you got firsthand experience, empirical data with all those cases coming in that gave you such a leg up when you started your business, and you got to get that experience while getting paid and not having the personal risk of your own business. And so I love that. I think that's the best way to get started, to learn a business, to then get started.
Course. And I think the other part that, the listeners might not necessarily think about, but it is very, very important, is when you're dealing with any type of professional entrepreneurial business. So like medical offices, law firms, accountants, whatever it is, if you're trying to grow an actual scalable business within a certain type of licensed profession, generally you're going to get 1 of 2 different types of that profession. So using lawyers, for example, because we're lawyers, you're going to get somebody who's very good at lawyering, or you're going to get someone like me who is very good at business development and business operations. A successful law firm, in my opinion, should have both.
Mhm.
So I'm lucky enough to have my wife. She's our managing partner. She's very good at the legal. I was good enough at the legal to scale and grow, but I hired lawyers very quickly, like faster than most firms, because I wanted to remove myself from that aspect so I can concentrate very heavily on the business development side of things and the operations. And so that is another reason why we grew so quickly. No law firm, in my opinion, will scale unless the person running the firm has the ability to understand the operations aspect of it and make business decisions while also not, in my opinion, hurting the human element of the personal injury case. Because unfortunately, the only way the business makes money is that we have to work on humans. We have to make business decisions with human lives, and that's a very, very fine line. And we concentrate, and our goals and our values in the firms or in our firm always aligns with that to make sure that we are not sacrificing our clients for our bottom line.
Yeah, that is just beyond important, and I think people have to take a look in the mirror whenever they're building businesses and exploring partnerships where you have a tendency to gravitate towards those that are like-minded, and you think, together you're going to accomplish so much more as versus actually having the stone cold operator and the person that's the specialist, regardless of industry. So you talk about it a little bit of getting started and how you were able to essentially qualify who your clients are, through, uh, the data that you got from the previous law firm that you worked at. But what about now? How are you marketing and advertising and acquiring clients in 2026 as versus when you got started almost 10 years ago?
Great question. And trust me, for anyone who's listening, and if you know my firm or you look it up and it appears, grand and amazing on the outside, trust me, we have gone through so many ups and downs. I have spent so much money making mistakes on that aspect of it, because the firm I came from was very, very heavy and still is on the radio. And they had a big budget. They got in early. They developed niches within that space that worked very, very successfully. And so, I obviously, when I had a little bit of revenue, tried to do the traditional avenue of marketing, which in law is generally going to be one of three things. It's going to be TV, radio, or billboards, or all three. Tried, my aspect of different variables of the traditional advertising model, and realized that unless you have a very, very large budget or an extremely large line of credit that you can pull from, which I had neither, you will basically be throwing your money away. You'll be lighting it on fire. And so we wasted millions and millions and millions of dollars over the course of the years trying to do that. And when I sat down and really tried to understand how am I going to compete with firms that are spending millions of dollars a month when I don't have that kind of capital, to put on marketing, but also stick with my goals of scaling it and grow the business, because eventually those referral sources we had to cut off because the referral fee splits when you grow too big has a diminished return. So we had to get our cases organically. We had to think about how to not have to rely on our referral partners to do that. And so I realized, what does the future of advertising look like? Because eventually radio, TV, billboards, they'll always be around in some aspect, in my opinion, but they're dying. Oh, sorry. They're dying, and at the end of the day, people are growing, they're young, they're going to different avenues for their information. People are watching YouTube, people are they have streaming services, everything's on the internet, and now, Chat GPT and AI, different sources are being utilized to ask information and research things. So not a few years ago now, it's like probably 4 or 5 years ago, I started to really heavily invest in online marketing. So really understanding, learning ad spends, Google, Facebook, Instagram accounts, and a hyper focus on learning how to monetize and optimize those avenues for as cheap as possible, while also heavily investing in organic SEO. And a lot of people think that's dead. It's not dead. And I don't think it will be dead, because anything you do will eventually always still pull from your organic rankings. And it really just helps boost everything else. And my goal was like, if you look at the best personal injury firm in Sacramento, I want to show up on top, which is where the ads are. I want to show up in the middle, which is where the map section is. And I want to show up at the bottom, which is where your organic website ranking comes in. I want to be everywhere. So that was my goal. And I knew that would take many, many years to do. So, now we're very successful at that. My cost per acquisition is probably at least half of my average competitor, maybe even more at sometimes. Um, and now we're very heavily invested in, LSAs, Google ad spends. But more importantly, the future is, in my opinion, ChatGPT. So we are creating and researching and understanding where these AI, models pull all their information from, and we're just dumping information into those models so that when people ask chat who's the best personal injury attorney in Orange County, we want our name to show up and we know where that's pulling that information from. So we're heavily investing in that. And we believe that in the next year or so, that will be the majority of where our clients come from. So our goal is to keep our cost per acquisition very low, which we're very successful at. And obviously, the more money we have to put in that, the better. But that's really how we market to our clients these days.
So it makes sense to me of, making sure you show up everywhere whenever people are searching for your services. Where I get confused a little bit, and it's also my lack of understanding on how some of these social media advertising, the targeted ads and everything like that work. With your client demographic being everything, an accident or a slip and fall could happen to anyone, regardless of age and everything like that. How do you, tell Meta this is who we target? Because, like for us, we're looking for people that are trying to buy land in one of these few states, and it's relatively simple. As versus you, it's like everywhere. How do you make those decisions on the advertising side?
So for us, with when you're dealing with like a professional service like ours, it's all about, how Meta thinks of you as an expert within the field. So it's basically authenticity and being able to, and so things like that is like, what awards have I gotten? What type of cases have we resolved? Do I do speaking engagements? And making sure that we're seen and validated and verified as an expert within our space, and that helps push our algorithms and push Meta to really push our firm over other firms. And so, what they do now is they try to verify. And we every quarter we get an email from Google and Meta, re-verify, redo photos. I have to put my license in there. I have to, walk around the office and make sure that we're doing videos so they know that there are people working in the offices that we do, our Google Map, law offices from. And so keeping up and making sure that our authenticity and our, you know, organic validated validity is to the top is what helps us push us to the right type of clients. And then it organically, because of the nature of who we are and they, read the type of things that I speak on and the awards that I'm getting, it automatically will know how to push that to the type of questions that are being asked. And obviously, listen, we do our content on keywords, right? Anyone who's going to write an article or want to, have SEO, you have to make sure you understand what people are searching for and include those keywords within your content. And so when we do podcasts, when we do interviews, when we do videos, there are certain things that we're speaking on that might even sound a little off in normal conversation, but it's very specific and very important because that's what grabs the algorithms, through these companies and pushes us to the right type of people searching for the right things.
So we've talked a lot about marketing, and I could talk about that for hours, but I want to hit all aspects of the business. And you get your client and you think the case is worthwhile, but I've got to think that in your field, I mean, it's so technical and case law is always evolving. And then other just laws, especially in California, that's endlessly building the rule book. How do you go about keeping up with that and having is it more a matter of hiring the right people there, or I'm kind of oscillating between a couple different questions here. I guess what I'm trying to say, maybe succinctly, is how do you stay on top of the case law and being able to actually effectively deliver for your clients after you've got your marketing dialed in?
Great question. So we'll start with that. Obviously, continued legal education is very important. Every state is going to have their own requirements. In California, we have to do a certain amount of hours of legal education every 3 years. We do it. We in our firm we do it every year. Like we go to conferences, we go and learn. And then we join certain organizations that have listservs and have, different types of chats that allow us to interact with other lawyers across the state of California and stay on top of things. And so if we come up with an issue that we're not familiar with, or that we're questioning whether or not our understanding of it is still accurate or still relevant, we can easily just communicate with thousands of lawyers across the state, with the organizations and the groups that we join, to make sure that we're on top of these things. And then hiring the right people that care about that obviously is very, very important. So that's how we stay on top of like current case law, um, to make sure that our demands are accurate, our theory of liability on certain cases are accurate, and making sure that, we are always ahead of the game. And because, most of the time we're dealing with adjusters. Adjusters aren't lawyers. They're designed to read a certain script and check off certain things, and we have to make sure that we give them enough information and prove to them that we know what we're talking about, for them to go around their normal day-to-day activities, to go to higher ups and go to their internal legal departments to say like, oh my gosh, these guys are serious. They know what they're doing. So that's how we get higher results, than our average competitor as well. So just making sure that you always are relevant and keeping on top of legal education. Again, that relates to that aspect, Dan, but it also relates to any aspect of business. Complacency is death. If you are not consistently trying to be better and grow and learn more, and surround yourself with people that are better and more successful than you, that know more than you, you're eventually going to die. It's just That's just the nature of the beast, because the world is always evolving in every aspect. You have to apply that to every part of the business, and that includes the legal part. And so just maintaining and staying on top of that is what helps us answer that question.
Okay, that makes sense. And so I think the bigger picture question I've been kind of waiting to get to is, what is the real constraint of your business as you're scaling? And so let me give an example. When I was a teenager, I worked at a landscaping company. And if you looked at the reviews online, not just for that company, but for all the local companies, they're all pretty much bad. It was very easy to find people and clients that wanted good landscapers. The hard part was finding employees who could pass a drug test, show up on time, and actually do the work. So very easy to sell a product. Lots of people wanted it. Everyone's frustrated with their vendor, but the real constraint of the business was hiring good people that weren't doing drugs, right? And so, what is the version of that in your business? Is it the talent? Is it the fierce competition in the marketing? Is it something else? What would you say it is?
I mean, listen, every industry is going to deal with that exact issue, right? Yeah. Hiring is always going to be a huge constraint in any business that grows. And trial and error is obviously a very simplistic answer of how to get around that. I mean, we've, over the course of the last, what is it now, almost 9 years of our firm, which this is a gross estimate. I have no idea if this is the accurate numbers, but I would have to suggest hundreds of employees, like major turnover in certain departments, at certain different times, just based on learning, opening up departments, closing down departments, trying to figure out what works best for the structure of the firm as well as we scaled up. But yeah, I mean, in our industry, the biggest problem when hiring talent is competing with these very, very large, high volume firms. So, you know, somebody that's right out of college that's trying to be hired as a case manager, and in our industry, case managers are the ones that organize the case for the lawyers. They're talking to the clients the majority of the time during like the treatments phase of things, and basically helping like build the evidence aspect of the case. Think of somebody coming out of college that's 21, 22, 23 years old, expecting to make six figures. It's insane, even in California, in my opinion. But law firms are hiring these people at 120, 130, $140,000 a year. And then they leave those firms because they're not very good. And they want to come to firms like ours and expect the same salary. So we have a very hard time acquiring talent for the right constraints of our payroll budgeting. And so, we had to figure out different strategies and ways and where to find talent to mold them where they don't have the expertise or they have the bad habits of the industry, where we don't have to pay them as much, but they can help grow with us and we can help grow with them. So, we've looked into different service based aspects because you're definitely servicing clients. You have to understand how to deal with clients that are upset and frustrated or confused. So we go a lot of times we go to restaurants or hotels and any type of like, you know, service management type of companies that are dealing with people all day long and they have to learn how to problem solve. And then we bring them in and have a very good management structure and then we put them through teaching and different education through within the firm to mold them into what we want. On the lawyer side, our biggest problem is egos. Lawyers, they go to law school, they come out of law school with a law degree, they pass the bar, and they just expect the world. And they don't realize lawyers like me and lawyers before me, especially, we had to pay our dues. My first job out of law school paid me $40,000 a year. It changed quickly because I proved myself and I was willing to do that. But these lawyers are expecting 150 grand right out of law school, which is insane. We don't pay our lawyers that much money right off the bat. We are in a business where we always basically tell the people, if you want to work here, you will have to prove yourself because we've been burnt, right? We paid those salaries before. That doesn't work out. Our overhead gets way too high. Revenue's not coming in. They're not closing cases. They're not communicating with clients. We realize that, you know, people coming from these large firms, which we thought were very good at teaching these people how to manage a case, weren't doing it very well. They didn't know how, the right doctors to work with. They didn't know how to communicate with clients well. They just did a bunch of stuff that didn't make sense and didn't really help our clients get through the system as fast as we want them to. And it just wasted resources. So our job really is to acquire the right type of talent at the right pace, and teach them along the way. So we had to develop management structures to do that because that, in my opinion, that's the best way to handle it. So with lawyers, the type of lawyer that we're looking for our specific type of business isn't the person that went to Harvard. It isn't the person that graduated top of their class. We want someone that's really, really good at understanding how to manage and organize and to negotiate. That's the skill set that we really need. And a lot of times, those skill sets sit within the average law student, someone who maybe graduated with a B average, someone who maybe not the best test taker, but can sit there and be able to apply fact to law very, very well, and communicate very, very well. That's what's important in our aspect of the industry because of the type of cases that we take on. You have to be able to do that. You have to be able to organize your caseload, understand how to project your caseload to hit the certain, monetative goals that our firm has and make sure that our clients are being represented at the level that we expect, and know when a case should resolve, when it shouldn't resolve, and how to get those cases pushed forward. So, a lot of trial and error, but our biggest constraint is ego and just sheer payroll, because people expect so much money. And something to help out with that, Dan, which might answer a question that you haven't asked yet, is we had to really figure out how to scale monetarily and volume wise while either maintaining or decreasing overhead. So we've invested very heavily in different AI tools and building out different, automated programs to help decrease a lot of the overhead. So, for example, reception, mail clerks, intake, different things that, balance verification of medical bills, bill requesting of medical departments can all now be done through AI bots where we can, we're not paying a 50 or 60 or $70,000 salary for someone to collect mail and organize it. We have one person scanning things into a system that can organize the mail, push it into the right folders, and then notify the right team members based on what's, on that document. And so we were able to decrease overhead that way, which also helps us reward and bonus the right people that are working very hard in helping this firm grow and scale and maintain the morals and values that we instill within, our firm. So having to deal with that and maintaining and organizing the firm at the right level and making sure that you have the right payroll budget and sticking to it, is the biggest way to do that. But we learned all that through trial and error.
Yeah, you definitely answered a couple questions that were on the list. So thanks for getting ahead there, which is what we need. I think one of the other biggest killers of business in general is just poor cash flow management. And with your industry and with your firm, you're talking some of these cases are going to take 3, 6, 9, 12, 24 months before you receive a single dime. How are you, from a top line revenue perspective, doing a good job projecting out, okay, we need to make money this month or we're not making payroll? And how does that kind of factor into case selection of, I imagine you have a few whales, a lot of kind of, standard size cases and then tons of smaller quick churn ones, but that's also just an assumption. How do you manage the actual revenue coming in?
Yeah, and the assumption is correct. Obviously, we have a handful percentage of cases that are, going to make almost an entire year's debt paid off at times, and then there's the average. The majority of our cases are the average everyday cases, and then of course we still take on the very small ones. That as long as you organize it the correct way and get it through, the system where the client is getting what they deserve and need at a certain pace, you're not losing money on those cases either. But it all comes down to one, cash flow management is very, very important. And trust me, we've had the wrong people in those spots as well, and we've suffered from it, and we've learned. And we're lucky enough to have a very robust accounting team and controller that knows how to do that very, very well. Um, but also being able to project, budget, and understand. And this is where the business development side of things come in. Is you have to be able to understand how to audit your case files. Again, this is the reason why, in my opinion, you should have an operator and a legal manager, because my goal is to look at our entire inventory, all of our cases, all of our clients on paper, which unfortunately takes away emotion, takes away that human elephant or element, and it makes me hyper focus on a business decisions while then being able to use that information, work with my wife and the legal team to make sure that these decisions aren't being utilized while sacrificing their departments. So having both is very, very important. And so what I do from the business side is I base everything on the law of averages. I take basically the biggest key performance indicators, so KPIs that I look at when dealing with budgeting and projecting is comes down to a few things. One, how many cases or clients are we acquiring each month? For how much? How long do those cases end up taking to resolve? And for how much? So at any given time, I know based on the law of averages, which I review every single quarter, I know how much we have in inventory. So how much overall we have for like a firm valuation aspect, where those cases are along the pipeline. So when these cases should resolve. So I know on average how much money we should be bringing in on the very base level every single month. And then how much more we can anticipate as far as like profit margins and making sure that we're staying within budget constraints. Because as those averages change, we have to change different decisions that we make, in our yearly budgeting meetings. And so we have quarterly meetings and we have yearly meetings, and we project based on, our last year's and our averages and our inventory, current inventory in our production models. So what attorneys we have, what they're doing, what they're able to do, how successful they are, and changing that around. And just it's just good auditing and good projection. So, on average, we know basically what we have to bring in to cover our nut and when during the month that money needs to come in. Because again, budgeting when these bills are need to be paid is very, very important, because the money comes in sporadically. And so making sure that, cases are being resolved daily, not monthly, daily. So an attorney has to be able to understand what cases need to be resolved, when they need to be resolved, and when you can push the envelope to get them resolved for full value, maybe ahead of time based on certain aspects of the case. And so if our attorneys aren't able to do that, then we're not able to live up to our, projections. And so I spend a significant amount of my particular time working and making sure that those numbers and those data points are hit and consistently monitored.
Got it. And it seems like you've done a good job over the years. I mean, we had conversations at Pinehurst about reducing your staff and increasing operational efficiencies. And AI, I imagine, has done a tremendous job, helping you, just like you mentioned, with all that. But in order to, another big killer in business is improper debt management, where I imagine, you start out with this 1 year overhead kind of nest egg. And as you're growing, as you're scaling, most likely, unless you just hit like win a mammoth case or something like that, you're probably going to have to bring in other people's money. And I imagine banks and lenders are jumping at the opportunity to lend to lend to attorneys, especially within personal injury. How do you determine what type of debt to take on when it makes sense, as versus kind of scaling back operations and waiting for the cases to resolve?
Great question. Again, I'm gonna probably answer the same way as most questions, which is, trial and error. We've made mistakes. We've been hit hard. We've scaled up significantly in overhead and staff, and thinking that that would result in more revenue, and then it doesn't, and then you have to scale back. Um, I look at things very differently than my competitors. So one of the biggest struggles that we have for us is, a lot of times it's definitely monetary constraint, because I'm not willing as a business owner to take on a certain type of debt that a lot of my competitors are taking on. So private equity is in the space. A lot of, funds and banks that have been developed specifically for personal injury, attorneys to evaluate and underwrite those, these type of firms, are willing to give astronomical amounts of money. I'm talking about tens of millions, if not more, and just free flow cash, which is incredible. But a lot of that comes with a huge, huge uh, liability. And so, so there are banks out there that, to get paid back, you're talking about a 20 to 30%, interest rate, or you're talking about a percentage of your monthly revenue flow. So they'll have access and be able to pull directly from your bank accounts, eh, you know, whenever they want, to make sure that they get their money paid back. And a lot of times you have to put personal liability, guarantees up. There are some of my biggest competitors have their homes up for collateral, which I'm not willing to do. My children live in that home. Like, God forbid the world goes to crap, I can squat in my house. Like, I mean, there's just no way I'm gonna put my personal family in jeopardy to help scale this firm. So we've been very specific on the types of lines of credits that we have. We have some, we pull from them when necessary, absolutely, but we're not willing to make horrible business math decisions for our egos, to be the biggest and the best, and have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of clients a month. That doesn't make sense to us. I'm just not willing to take on that type of debt. So really, when it comes down to it, is being very specific and very cautious of how fast we scale now, when we scale, when it's appropriate to scale, and when to utilize our lines of credit. So what we've developed is, before we developed a growth model where, if we have these lines of credit, we can live up to anywhere between 100 to 120% of our budget. So if we're losing 20% of our budget every single month, that's okay in a growth model. Well, that became too scary at certain points. So now we're the exact opposite. We always make sure that our budgetary models are anywhere between 60 and 80% of our average monthly revenue, to make sure that we always have wiggle room. We can always kind of grow up a little bit. We can always scale down a little bit without getting in too much trouble. And then I always personally make sure that my personal finances are protected, so that, God forbid something happens in the firm, I always have liquidity to put back into the firm to protect the firm. So it's funny, I just did a podcast with another member of our M19 group who does financial management. And one of his biggest questions is, do you think that you are um, as efficient with your tax strategies and your personal finances as you are with the business? And I said, no, but it's a no for a design reason, that I always have to have a certain level of liquidity, sorry, to make sure that I can do that. And I had to do that the last quarter of last year. Our projections were horrible. We had a few attorneys that didn't work out and didn't produce at a very high level of payroll. And so we had to make up for that, and to make sure that we didn't get in trouble, I had to put a significant amount of our personal finances back into the firm. So that helps me now. Obviously we're taking less risk, but it's something that we can control a lot better, and it allows our employees to feel safe, and that's the biggest thing, because you don't want to look like you're scaling up and then all of a sudden have to lay off 20% of your staff, and then what does that say to the rest? Like, we have to maintain a very strong core internally, to make sure that we develop systems to make sure our clients are being taken care of.
Sure. Sounds like you're opting for security and slow and steady growth rather than shooting for the moon. So, in that pursuit, what does that look like? When you're looking at your projections for the rest of the year, it's already May. Are you trying to acquire X more cases above what you normally do? Is it more, going back to my earlier question? No, we got to hire a couple more good people first, or what does that path actually look like, and what are the major bottlenecks at this time?
Cool. And that's a great question, a loaded question, and I can actually address pretty much everything be asked in an efficient way. So, with the development of AI and making sure that our budgets are lower, we have developed a system where at any given time we can take on 20% more without hiring any more people. So we'll always continue at that growth model, so that if we do end up getting a bunch of revenue in, and we can push towards more marketing and get those cases in, we're not having to hire people, train people at that level. We can do that very slowly, organically, and still maintain a higher profit margin. So that's number one. So the development of AI, automation, you know, filling in, gaps allow us to do that, always take on more. So the goal is that, one day I could take on double the amount of cases, or maybe 100% more cases at the same level, just because of more AI and more automation, where, people can take on a lot more work without losing the client, results at a more efficient rate. So that's number one, obviously. Number two is, now we hyper focus on, when those whales end up resolving, being very strategic in what we're doing with that. So that's when we open up the growth model. We take that revenue, there are cases that are going to bring in millions and millions of dollars in one case. So we're going to be taking that money, and as those cases develop over time, pushing that through a new growth model, and basically operating almost as like a separate entity, protecting that money on itself while not affecting the primary business. If it works, great. If it doesn't, okay, we're not at any loss at that point, because the main part of the firm is still operational at its current level. Maybe the growth didn't work, maybe it did work, and great. And then we can push that back into the main firm. So utilizing those whales as the growth model, and making sure we're always marketing to a very specific type of case that can bring in those very large results at any given time. And if we can maintain one to maybe two of those cases a year, we will be able to hit our overall growth miles, because, global domination is still an ultimate, delusional goal of mine. It just, now it's more reasonable. And now I know it's not going to happen tomorrow. So being able to project that at a certain rate, and utilize the money that we have organically instead of borrowing it to scale, for me is more safety and more protection for the firm.
Yeah, and I love that, because I think we've all, as entrepreneurs, gone through phases where it's like, oh, I know how to do this, time to explode. You'd start taking on risky debt, and yeah, I just, there's certain months of my life that I think about, of when all that debt comes due because the projects didn't work out, and you don't sleep, and you can risk, your family's well-being with stuff like that. But we want to be respectful of your time. We're about to wrap up, but I have to ask about the growth of, you've got the opportunity for market takeover to, continue in, different parts of Southern and Northern California, all up and down the state of California, to keep growing. What about out of state expansion, and where do you kind of see the future of MVP going, besides global domination, of course?
Well, I mean, the answer is definitely global domination, but how we're going to achieve that is actually very different than how I initially thought it was going to be. So, good question. Um, Something I didn't actually touch about earlier is that we weren't always MVP accident attorneys. That we started out by being Sachs Law, which, my name is Brett Sachs. Obviously, my name's on the door. Typical normal law firm stuff.
Ego.
When I decided, yeah, ego. When I decided that I actually wanted to go, national, and go into other jurisdictions, and maybe potentially sell one day, I knew that I personally had to be removed from that aspect. So when we changed our name to MVP, we wanted something that was very easily marketable, recognizable, and can basically resonate with anyone. And so, I played sports growing up. It was natural. And, one day if I come back on, I'll tell you a story of how the MVP name actually came about, but it's a completely different story. It actually ends up being perfect. Originally, after I made that decision, my goal was to open up offices in every state, get licenses, work with attorneys in those states, basically duplicate what we have here in other states as different entities under the name of MVP. Um, that's kind of changed a little bit. We are doing that, obviously. We're at right now licenses in Texas, but my wife's getting licensed in Indiana. We're building that part of it, but it's going to be a much smaller part of the national brand. What I've really wanted to start doing, because I believe we're so good at the operation development stage of thing, is create an entity under the umbrella of MVP, which essentially acquires other firms in other states. Obviously, you have to be licensed there to do that. So we're doing, that's something we're working on. But if I can take on a percentage of other firms and join with other firms that, where the lawyers aren't as good as operations, they don't have to go find somebody who is good at operations. Like, hey, listen, I know what to do. I know how to do it. This allows you to be the lawyer. This allows you to do what you're good at. I can come in and I can take care of operations. My team can take care of the development, make sure that the systems, procedures, everything is in place to make sure that you're achieving your goals at being the best lawyer that you can possibly be. I believe that's a much easier, faster, and a way less risk adverse way of establishing a national brand. And so that is going to be our next step and our next goal.
That's amazing. Yeah, I've got, good high school buddy that he's a personal injury lawyer in Houston. And I think of what you guys could do for a firm like his. And it's, I mean, just unlimited growth with less risk as versus going and, opening all these brand new offices up. But Brett, we want to be respectful of your time. We'll definitely have to have you come back on the show, but where can people find out more about you and where can they look you up?
Please, I mean, obviously, our website is the easiest way to get any information you need, which is www.themvp.com, THEMVP.com. You can look us up on Instagram, MVP Action Attorneys, and you can look me up personally on Instagram, which is, I believe my Instagram handle now is the MVP Esquire. Or, again, the website is by far going to be the easiest way to get information. And I apologize for all the beeping. I try to turn off all the notifications. I just don't know how to do it. But yeah, that's how you find us.
That's awesome. Yeah, and props to you for being able to get that domain name. Brett, it was an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Everyone go take a look at what he's doing and what he's building. It's really, really cool, really, really exciting. But this is Brett Sachs with Mason McDonald and Dan Haberkas on Big Picture Blueprint, signing off.